Hello, everyone. I'm the storyteller, and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep. So, before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? And what time are you watching now? Get comfortable and relax. The Lighthouse. Keep us off the jagged coast of Rockport. The old lighthouse stood like a forgotten sentinel, battered by time and the relentless sea. Its once bright beacon was long extinguished, its glass panes fractured, and the spiral staircase within rusted and clinging to life. Locals whispered about it in hushed tones, claiming it was cursed. But for decades, it had stood empty, just another relic of a time when men fought to tame the sea. That was until the four of us decided to visit. I can't even remember whose idea it was. Really. Probably Eric's. He always had a taste for the morbid, dragging us into places we didn't belong. There was me, Liz, the unofficial voice of reason, Sarah, my best friend since kindergarten, the quiet observer, and Danny, my boyfriend, who never could resist a dare. We set out on a chilly October afternoon, the sea roaring against the cliffs like some restless beast. The path to the lighthouse was overgrown, and the air carried the faint, metallic tang of salt. Creepy as hell, Danny muttered, as we reached the base of the lighthouse. It loomed above us, taller than I'd expected, its faded paint peeling in long strips. "Come on," Eric said, grinning, as he pushed open the warped wooden door. It groaned like it hadn't been disturbed in years. Inside, the air was stale, tinged with mildew. The spiral staircase climbed upward into darkness, and the floor was littered with debris, broken furniture, scattered papers, and the remnants of seabirds, unfortunate enough to get trapped inside. It didn't take long to find it. In one of the small rooms near the base, under a layer of dust, lay a journal bound in cracked leather. Danny was the one who picked it up. "Looks old, Buck," he said, thumbing through the pages. The handwriting was cramped and slanted, ink faded but legible. Eric leaned over his shoulder. "What's it say?" Danny read aloud. "August 3rd, 1938. Strange lights again tonight. Beneath the waves, moving like living things. Tried to focus the beam on them, but they scatter like shadows. The voices, louder now, calling my name. Are they real? Or is it the isolation playing tricks?" "That's not unsettling at all," Sarah said dryly, crossing her arms. But Eric was hooked. "Keep reading." Danny hesitated, but he did. As the entries continued, the writer, someone named Matthew Coleridge, detailed a descent into paranoia. He wrote of glowing lights beneath the waves, shifting and pulsating like they had a will of their own. Of whispers carried on the wind, indistinct at first, but growing clearer by the day. September 12th, 1938. The voices are stronger now. They call to me from the deep, not in words but in feelings. Loneliness, longing, hunger. They need me. I stood at the edge tonight, staring into the black water. I almost stepped forward. Almost. Okay, that's enough, I said, feeling a shiver creep down my spine. But Danny wouldn't stop. September 20th, 1938. It's not just the lights. There's something in the water. Watching. Waiting. I can feel it. When I sleep, I see it. Tall, pale, with eyes that burn like dying stars. It wants me to join it. I'm afraid. Do you guys hear that? Sarah's voice cut through the room like a knife. We all froze, straining to listen. At first, I thought it was the wind, but no. It was something else. Faint, distant, and melodic. A voice, rising and falling like a song carried on the tide. Stop messing around, Eric said, but his voice wavered. I'm not, Sarah whispered. The air in the room felt heavy, charged. The song grew louder, still faint, but impossible to ignore. It wasn't just in our ears, it was in our heads, weaving through our thoughts, pulling at something deep inside. It's probably the wind, Danny said. But his hand trembled as he shut the journal. Let's go, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I didn't care how much Eric complained. I wanted out. But as we climbed the stairs, the sound followed us. A whisper at first, then a chorus, growing stronger with every step. By the time we reached the top, it was deafening. And then we saw them. Through the shattered glass of the lantern room, the ocean stretched out in every direction, black and endless. But beneath the surface, faint and shimmering, were the lights. They pulsed like living things, moving in patterns too precise to be random. They're beautiful, Sarah murmured, stepping closer to the edge. Sarah, no! I grabbed her arm, pulling her back. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused, like she was in a trance. It's them, she whispered. The voices. They're here. The lights grew brighter, closer, illuminating the water's surface. And then, just for a moment, something broke through. A pale shape, impossibly tall, with hollow eyes that burned. The song swelled, almost unbearable now. My head throbbed, and I felt the pull, the urge to step forward, to answer the call. Danny shouted something, yanking me back as my foot hovered over the edge. Eric was screaming, but the words didn't register. And then, as suddenly as it began, the lights vanished, the song ceased. We were left in silence, the crash of the waves below the only sound. We didn't speak as we stumbled down the stairs, through the abandoned rooms and out into the cold night. The lighthouse loomed behind us, dark and silent. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching from its broken windows. We never talked about what happened that night. Not really. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I hear it again. The faintest whisper, carried on the wind. And I know they're still out there, waiting. As we trudged back to the car, the wind howled around us, cold and biting. No one said a word. The silence between us felt heavier than the night itself, like we were all afraid that speaking would make it real. Eric broke the silence first. That wasn't real, right? I mean, it couldn't have been. It's just stories, tricks of the mind. None of us answered. I think we all knew it wasn't worth arguing. We piled into the car, and Danny fumbled with the keys, his hands still trembling. The engine sputtered to life, and we drove back to town, the lighthouse disappearing into the mist behind us. 2 weeks later, life went on, or at least it was supposed to. But something had shifted. I noticed it in small ways at first. Danny wasn't sleeping well. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, muttering about lights. Eric, usually so loud and confident, had gone quiet, withdrawn. And Sarah was the worst. She stopped coming to class, stopped answering her phone. When I went to check on her, her mom said she barely left her room, spending hours staring out the window at the ocean. It's like she's waiting for something, her mom whispered, eyes full of worry. I didn't tell her about the lighthouse. The dreams started a few nights later. At first, they were just flashes. Dark water, cold and endless. The lights pulsing far below like a heartbeat. Then the voices came, whispering my name, promising things I couldn't understand but felt drawn to. I'd wake up gasping for air, my sheets damp with sweat. But no matter how much I tried to shake it, the dreams lingered, clinging to me like salt on my skin. It was Eric who called us together. We need to go back, he said, his voice low but steady. We were sitting in his basement, the air heavy with mildew and unease. Are you insane? Danny snapped. After what happened, no way. They won't leave us alone, Eric said, looking at each of us in turn. You know it as well as I do. The dreams, the voices, they're not going away. Not until we do something. What do you mean, do something? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Eric's jaw tightened. We have to end it. Destroy the journal, the lighthouse, whatever's keeping them tied to this place. The last trip to the lighthouse felt different. The air was colder, sharper, and the path seemed more treacherous, as if the land itself wanted to keep us out. But we pressed on. The four of us drawn together by fear and something deeper. The journal was still there, lying on the floor where Danny had left it. It felt heavier this time, like it was pulsing in my hands. What now? Sarah whispered. Eric pulled a can of lighter fluid from his bag. We burn it, here and now. I hesitated. The journal was a relic of someone's life, a record of their descent into madness. But when I looked at Sarah, her eyes hollow and distant, I knew we didn't have a choice. Eric doused the journal, his hands shaking as he struck a match. The flame caught, consuming the pages in a hungry blaze. The voices screamed, not in words, but in feelings. rage, pain, despair. The air in the room thickened, vibrating with an energy that made my teeth ache. The lights burst to life outside the windows, swirling and churning like a storm beneath the waves. "We need to go," Danny shouted, grabbing my arm. But Sarah didn't move. She stood frozen, her gaze locked on the ocean. "They're calling me," she whispered. "I have to go." "No!" I shouted, grabbing her shoulders and shaking her. "They're not real. They're—" The floor shuddered beneath us, and the windows shattered, the wind howling like a living thing. The lights grew brighter, closer, until they filled the room with a blinding, unnatural glow. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The lights vanished, the voices fell silent, and the journal was nothing more than ashes on the floor. We never spoke of what happened that night. Sarah moved away a month later, and the rest of us drifted apart. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I still feel it. That pull, that longing. I dream of the ocean, of lights beneath the waves, and of something waiting, patient and eternal. I don't go near the water anymore, but I can't help but wonder, what happens if it calls again? The pull of the ocean never truly left me. Even though I avoided the coast, the dreams continued, stronger, more vivid. The lights danced in my mind, and the whispers grew louder. They weren't calling my name anymore. They were crying out for Sarah. 6 months later, I hadn't heard from Sarah since she moved. She'd vanished from social media, stopped replying to texts, and her phone number was disconnected. But the dreams brought me back to her over and over again. One night, I couldn't stand it anymore. I called Eric. "I think Sarah's in trouble," I told him. Eric hesitated before replying. "I know," he said. "I've been having the dreams too. I think we all have." I called Danny next. He was reluctant, angry even. But eventually, he agreed. We had to find Sarah. We traced her to a small coastal town a few hours away. Her mother said she'd left without much explanation, just packed up and went. I wasn't surprised when we found out she'd rented a house by the water. The first thing I noticed when we arrived was how isolated it was. The house sat at the edge of a crumbling cliff, the ocean stretching out endlessly behind it. The waves roared below like they were alive. Sarah answered the door, but she wasn't the Sarah I remembered. Her skin was pale, her eyes sunken, and she looked thinner than ever. "I knew you'd come," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, what's going on?" I asked, stepping inside. The house was dark, cold, and empty save for a few pieces of furniture. In the corner of the living room was a single chair facing a large window overlooking the sea. "They won't leave me alone," she said, her gaze drifting to the ocean. "I hear them every night. They want me to join them." Eric cursed under his breath. "We burned the journal. This should have stopped." "They're not bound to the journal," Sarah replied. "They're in the water, in the air. They've always been here. And now, they're inside me." That night, we stayed with her. None of us wanted to leave her alone. though I wasn't sure how much good we could do. The sound of the ocean was deafening, even with the windows closed. The pull was stronger here. I could feel it in my bones. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke to the sound of the front door creaking open. Sarah was gone. "Get up!" I shouted, shaking Eric and Danny awake. We bolted outside, the cold air biting at our skin. Sarah was already at the edge of the cliff, her white nightgown billowing in the wind. "Sarah, stop!" I screamed. But she didn't turn around. She stepped closer to the edge, her feet bare against the jagged rocks. The ocean below was alive with lights, brighter than I'd ever seen. They pulsed in unison, a heartbeat that matched the rhythm of my own. "They're waiting for me," Sarah said, her voice carried back to us on the wind. Eric grabbed my arm. "We have to stop her." Danny was already running toward her, but just as he reached her, the ground beneath them gave way. "Sarah!" I screamed, rushing forward. Eric and I pulled Danny back just as the edge of the cliff crumbled into the sea. Sarah was gone. For a moment, the lights below burned brighter, swirling and dancing in triumph. And then they vanished, leaving the ocean black and empty. We searched for her body, but it was never found. The police called it an accident, a tragic case of erosions claiming another victim. But we knew the truth. The whispers stopped after that. The dreams faded, and for a while I thought it was over. But every now and then, I catch a glimpse of something in the water, faint lights pulsing like a heartbeat. And I know she's still down there, waiting. Life moved on, but only on the surface. The truth lingered, buried deep, like a wound that refused to heal. We stopped talking about Sarah. Not because we didn't care, but because none of us could face the weight of it. Eric left town shortly after, moving inland, as far from the ocean as he could. Danny and I tried to stay together, tried to pretend everything was normal, but the cracks ran too deep. By the time spring rolled around, we weren't speaking anymore. I stayed in Rockport. Part of me wanted to leave, to run from the memories, but something held me here. Or maybe I just couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah wasn't gone. Not entirely. It happened again a year later. It was late. Too late to be awake, but I was. The insomnia had returned, along with the whispers. I told myself it was just stress or a bad dream. But when I looked out my window that night, I saw them. The lights. They were faint, shimmering on the horizon, but unmistakable. They pulsed in rhythm, slow and deliberate, like they were alive. The whispers grew louder, clearer, like they were standing in the room with me. "Come closer." I stood frozen, my breath hitching in my chest. Every instinct told me to look away, to turn off the light, to hide. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself stepping outside, my feet bare on the cold grass. The air was heavy with salt, the wind carrying the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks. The lights were brighter now, swirling just beyond the shore. And with them came something else. A figure. It stood tall in the water, pale and skeletal, its eyes glowing faintly like dying embers. It didn't move, but I felt its presence pressing down on me, an ancient weight that made my knees tremble. "Sarah?" I whispered, the word catching in my throat. The figure tilted its head, and for a moment, I thought it smiled. I don't remember how I got back inside. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in my bed, the morning sun streaming through the curtains. The lights were gone. The whispers had stopped. But something had changed. I couldn't stop thinking about the figure, about the way it had looked at me, like it knew me, like it had been waiting. And in the days that followed, I began to understand. The pull wasn't just Sarah's anymore. It was mine. Now, every time I close my eyes, I see the ocean. I feel its cold embrace, its endless depth. The lights call to me, singing a song I can't ignore. I've started walking to the shore at night, standing at the edge of the cliffs where Sarah vanished. I haven't gone down to the water yet, but I know I will. It's only a matter of time, because they're still out there. And now, they're waiting for me. The end.